Hi, I'm Josh with Metal in Motion Outdoor Power Equipment Repair. Today I'm going to show you how to test a solenoid. Now, from our last video you learned what a solenoid was and how it works. Maybe you're still saying to yourself, what's so important about a solenoid? A solenoid can be a very common problem to a no-crank situation. What do I mean by a no-crank situation? I mean when you sit on your lawnmower, you push the brake down, and you turn the key, the engine doesn't even turn over. Now let me begin by saying that there are many tests to run to determine the problem of a no-crank situation. But nonetheless, this is a test that we do to determine if the solenoid is good. One of the tools you'll need is a digital multimeter. You can buy one of these for as cheap as $7 to $10, and that really would be all that you would need to run this test. The first thing we want to do is check and see if our battery has 12 volts. In other words, we want to make sure it's fully charged. Whether you bought your battery 3 years ago or 3 days ago, check the battery. You wouldn't believe how many no-crank situations we get in here simply because the battery was dead. The next step is to make sure that your brake is pressed down and in its locked position. Make sure your blades are turned off, and make sure your transaxle is in neutral. Next, locate the solenoid. Now, depending on what model you have will depend on where the solenoid is. On some models, they're located behind the steering column, underneath the gas tank. They're mounted up under a panel. On some other models, they're located under a panel between your legs if you're sitting on the mower. And on other mowers, they're located under a panel below the back seat. When you find the solenoid, you need to determine if it's a 3-pole or a 4-pole solenoid. I have here a 4-pole solenoid, and the reason they call it a 4-pole solenoid is because it has 4 places to connect wires. A 3-pole would not have this one right here. It would only have these 3. This little one here is simply a ground wire. On a 3-pole solenoid, it grounds through its metal base. On a 4-pole, it has to ground through that tab. When you find the solenoid, what we want to do is we want to disconnect the little wire. If it's a 4-pole, it's going to be on the bottom left-hand side, and if it's a 3-pole, it's going to be the only wire on the bottom. We want to disconnect that wire. We want to set our multimeter on DC volts 20, or whatever the next setting is above 14 volts. We want to take the positive side of our multimeter and attach it to that little wire. We want to take the negative side of our multimeter and attach it to ground. Whether it's a bolt or whether it's the frame of the engine, either one will work. When we turn the key to the start position, we should have 12 volts showing up on the multimeter. Now, what if we don't have 12 volts showing up on the multimeter? This tells us that there is a problem somewhere other than the solenoid. In other words, you could have a bad brake safety switch. You could have a bad blade safety switch. You could have a bad neutral safety switch. You could have a bad ground, or you could have a bad key switch. And it would require more testing to determine which one of those would be bad. But if you do have 12 volts, then we're good. That lets us know that all the safety switches are working, the grounds are good and clean and they're working, the key switch is working properly, and we can go on to the next step. Connect that little wire back to the solenoid and take your positive lead, and we're going to connect it to the top right-hand cable. It's the big red wire that's coming off this side here. We're going to connect it to that and turn the key again and see if you have 12 volts showing up on the multimeter. If you do, then that lets us know that we have 12 volts coming into the solenoid and we have 12 volts coming out of the solenoid, and that the solenoid most likely is good. If you do not have 12 volts coming out of the solenoid, chances are the solenoid is either bad or you have a ground that is not connected well. If it's a 3-pole solenoid, you might want to take the solenoid off of the frame, unbolt it, clean the metal frame that it bolts against, and get that good and shiny, bolt the solenoid back on, and test it again. If you still do not have 12 volts coming out of the solenoid, chances are the solenoid is bad. If it's a 4-pole, you can simply make sure that wire is cleaned. You could trace the wire back to wherever it goes. You might be able to see if it's bolted to something, make sure that that's clean. But usually, if you do not get 12 volts coming out and all the grounds are good, the solenoid usually is bad. So I'm Josh with Metal in Motion Outdoor Power Equipment Repair. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more videos.